What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Cosmic Wonder, where we talk all things Marvel and MCU, and Moonknight is well underway. We are halfway through it now, and a lot of people seem to really be enjoying it. It's a different MCU project than we've ever gotten before, but of course, it still kind of feels like a Marvel project. It has a lot of really cool aspects to it. One of those including, of course, the Egyptian gods. And I won't spoil it for those who haven't seen up to episode 3 yet, but there are some really cool scenes in the Moonknight series that involve the gods. And of course, Khonshu is a huge part of it, and he is the Egyptian god of the moon. And with this Egyptian lore being introduced to the MCU now more than ever, and Moonknight / Stephen Grant / Mark Spector / possibly Jake Lockley now being introduced to the MCU as well, people are wondering, when the heck does this take place in the MCU? We have no frame of reference at all, as Moonknight doesn't really reference the MCU that much. Even with an Easter egg in the latest episode talking about a different city that we've heard somewhere in the MCU before, that doesn't explain when this takes place in the MCU, as the city has been around for a very, very long time. However, thanks to a big Easter egg in one of the Moonknight episodes, it looks like we have a pretty good time frame of when Moonknight takes place in the MCU. We can pretty much narrow it down to a very particular time period. And somebody from Marvel Studios did come out and start talking about when it does take place and why they don't really reference any time in the movie. We also have some really cool Thor and Black Panther connections to talk about today, so let's dive into it. And of course, if you're new, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the latest videos. So right away, let's talk about what one of the Moonknight writers had to say about the show's vague placement in the MCU timeline. It's actually kind of interesting, as Moonknight writer Jeremy Slater doesn't exactly know where it falls on the MCU timeline, and apparently that was actually done very intentionally. They did it on purpose, but here's what he said. A lot of people have asked this, but I have no idea. Sorry. We didn't know when our show would debut in relation to their other shows and films, so the timeline was intentionally left vague. That's very interesting because Moonknight does kind of seem to be a show that is very separate from the MCU. Yes, of course it takes place inside of the MCU, but there aren't really many connections to the MCU and other superheroes, so it would make sense that they weren't really trying to connect it to anything and put it any specific place in the timeline. However, like I said, there is an Easter egg that does give us a pretty specific time frame. Now, this Easter egg was found by Ryan over at Screen Crush, so credit to him for this. It's in Moonknight episode 1, where Steven is trying to stay awake and he's learning about the Egyptian Ennead. Well, when Steven is reading up on the Ennead, we can actually see some other books in the background, and they are about Asgard and Wakanda. However, the Asgard book seems to be specifically about New Asgard. On the bottom, the book appears to read the history of Wakanda, but on the top, it seems to read what's old is new again, Asgard. Now, we actually know enough about Thor Love and Thunder from the merchandising that has been released to know that after Avengers Endgame, New Asgard is now on Earth, and they're kind of an attraction now for the people of Earth and kind of a vacation location. And we know that they do such things as Asgard boat tours. And we'll talk about this in just a minute, but what this really is pointing to is the fact that Asgard being new again, as in being on Earth, means that Moonknight most likely takes place after New Asgard is on Earth. A lot of people have been debating whether Moonknight is before the snap, during the snap, after the snap. We've seen some footage of Moonknight falling from a cliff. Some people were wondering if this was Moonknight coming back from the snap after Avengers Endgame. Well, since New Asgard was developed after Avengers Endgame, at the very end of Avengers Endgame, this means that Moonknight takes place after Avengers Endgame, and probably takes place at least a year after, because people are writing books about New Asgard, and that just doesn't happen in a few months. Now, I do acknowledge that this could be about when Thor actually appeared to Earth, because people kind of became aware of the Asgardian gods again, because Thor kind of became a celebrity after the Avengers. Someone could have wrote a book about it then. However, the writer did say a lot of other shows were coming out at the same time, and he didn't know when this was going to take place in concerns to them. Which also does imply that the show does have a general timeline, they just didn't know what show was going to be released first, and what the timelines for the other shows were. But it probably means that this show, Moon Knight, does take place around these other shows that were supposed to be released, like Hawkeye and She-Hulk and Ms. Marvel, all taking place after the snap, and after Avengers Endgame, which was the 5-year gap. So, like I said, here we have kind of a pretty general time frame of when Moon Knight is taking place in the MCU. It's taking place after the events of Avengers Endgame, and if I had to guess, it probably takes place 6 to 8 years after the snap, 1 to 3 years after the events of Avengers Endgame. Especially because so far the shows that have come out after Avengers Endgame have been anywhere between 3 months to 6 months to a year after the events of Avengers Endgame, as far as the MCU timeline is concerned, not the actual release timeline. But what's really interesting is this Easter egg right here, the book about Asgard and the book about Wakanda. And they're interesting for 2 reasons, as there are 2 different books. The Wakanda Easter egg is very interesting because of all the events that are taking place in Moon Knight. In Marvel Comics, the Black Panther god Bast is a part of the Egyptian Ennead. And in episode 3, we even see a statue of Bast. However, the avatar for Bast is not in the meeting. And I'm trying to be vague to avoid spoilers for those who haven't seen it. But Stephen explains that there are 9 Egyptian gods in the Ennead in the MCU, and there were not 9 gods in attendance, which means there are some gods missing, and one of those gods missing was the Black Panther and Egyptian god Bast. And this is very interesting, and it also does kind of help the timeline question as well. But what's interesting about Bast being gone and the Avatar not being there is that Black Panther 2, Wakanda Forever, is coming out this year as well. And reports have actually said that we will be seeing Bast again in Wakanda Forever. This could explain why we didn't see the Avatar of Bast in episode 3. The gods were called together, but Bast wasn't there. What was Bast doing? Well, probably dealing with whatever is happening in Wakanda Forever. We know that Bast actually chose the very first Black Panther and guided him to the heart-shaped herb, and we know that a new Black Panther is going to have to come in Wakanda Forever. It would make sense that Bast would be a part of this. And this is a sad subject, but although we don't know for sure yet if they're going to kill T'Challa in the film since Chadwick Boseman is no longer with us, we do assume that he is going to be dead in the MCU. And rumors of a funeral scene have been going on, so perhaps Bast couldn't make it because she was attending the funeral of T'Challa, the Black Panther. And again, this would mean that Moon Knight takes place around Wakanda Forever if Bast truly isn't there because she is dealing with Wakanda Forever events, which means this show probably takes place, like I said, between 3 months to a year after Avengers Endgame. And it's really interesting that all of the stuff that we've seen so far for Thor Love and Thunder shows us that New Asgard is kind of going to be a tourist attraction now, but this makes sense because they're not rich anymore. They don't have a city of gold anymore on Asgard. They're on Earth now, and it looks like they're going to have to be making some money to survive. But we'll have to wait and see on that. Fortunately, we don't have to wait that much longer for Thor Love and Thunder. In the meantime, let me know what you think about these Easter eggs and when Moon Knight takes place in the MCU timeline and its connection to Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the latest MCU news. For live updates, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. Woof woof.